Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Card Talk, a podcast where we spend just a little bit of time talking about new players joining this amazing game. I'm your host, Dave Walsh.
And I'm Ted Bannock, and I love explaining things about this game to new players and veteran players alike. So that is what we're doing in this special video series in New Player February, which I'm excited to do. And we have a wonderful episode coming out today.
Yes. And you know what? I have to say that this was Ted's idea, doing these shows about the phases, and I'm happy that Ted is part of the team. Grant is, I don't know exactly where Grant is right now, but he's still with us. He's still here. He's just doing his thing over in England. But here at Card Talk,
he's on his own quest.
He is on his own quest. He's on Grant's quest. And so normally at Card Talk, we spend time talking about player cards, in-depth analysis of player cards. But for February, we usually put our normal content on hold to bring, as Ted said, our extravaganza month. So this year, we're continuing to bring content focused on the revised core set. And we're also going to use this as a little bit of a please support us drive, so that you can get out there. I know that there's a whole bunch of people that listen to us and who do follow us, but for those of you who are interested in following us, we do have this content all on our YouTube channel. That's where you can subscribe and get notifications and comment on the show. If you have questions, I'm usually over there answering questions and commenting with everybody pretty quickly. If you listen to us on the audio side, it would be awesome if you could subscribe, rate, and review us, because we want to, as Ted said, push the algorithm to help show new players what content is out there if they're interested in podcasts. And so if we're not getting subscriptions and ratings and things like that, we fall off into the nether regions. We do have a blog over at Card Talk 2018, which follows along with the normal content of the show, where we do in-depth card analysis. Matt is involved over there as our web blog master dude guy. I don't know if I'm making much sense, but yeah, that's a super official
web blog master dude guy,
right?
And follows along with the normal content, does a great job of writing reviews, and we have he works to coordinate some guest writers as well to get some additional thoughts and insights on cards. So check it out if you got a minute.
Yep. And then lastly, kind of the pinnacle of showing your support for us as creators in the community, it would be to go over to Patreon, patreon.com/cardtalk2018. Helps keep the lights on. Every year we give away swag to all our listeners, or all our patrons. And at the $5 level and up per month, we give out big swag, and we're already working busily at producing that. You have to be active for that between April and Con of the Rings, which is usually the first week in October. So please, show your love and show us what we mean to you in the community by doing all those things, or some of those things that we suggest. But we're not here to just beg for people to like us, right, Ted? We actually have some reasonable and awesome content. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you're above that. I am not. Like us, please.
Today's episode is the quest phase episode for new players. So we're going to be talking about specifically and only the quest phase of this game, which is the third phase in the game. So if you have questions about resource and planning, there's a separate episode before this to talk about those two phases. And we're going to be talking about ye old questing, which is, when I explain, it's a crucial, all the phases are important to take them in order and take them properly for both, mostly for your benefit and to have a fair game for the encounter deck. But if I describe this game to someone who's never played before, or if I'm just starting to teach somebody, I basically tell them the game breaks down into two parts, and that is questing and fighting. And it's like at the very basic level, way more phases and depth to that, but I just tell them like your characters are on a quest to accomplish a task, and along the way they have to do fighting.
Yeah, and this is the adventuring part of it, right? And so I think that
Yeah.
this is what separates maybe some of the competitive card games like Magic the Gathering, which is all just kind of beat up the other enemies, the other guys, people, from this game, is that there's this whole separate thing where you are adventuring through locations and through parts of Middle Earth that is completely separate from the combat part of the game. And so, I really, while the quest phase is probably the most stressful for
Yeah.
reasons we'll get into, I really think that this is what separates it, what puts it apart above the kind of the competitive card game format. So, Ted,
Yep.
how are we starting off this quest phase?
Yeah, so the phase begins. You've ended the planning phase and you've decided, okay, I'm going to move into the quest phase now because I've taken my planning. I'm done. I'm ready to make progress on the scenario. So the quest phase will begin. We'll make a note here that after the quest phase begins, there is an immediate action window. This action window, you can use to take any action you want to. It could be actions on heroes or events from your hand that you didn't wait till the planning phase. And an important distinction that certain cards have, we'll mention them now. There are certain actions in the game which are limited to quest actions, and they will be printed on the event or hero or location, wherever they're printed on, that they just say quest action. It's that
and that's
straightforward.
and that is telling you that that's the only time in which you can play the card or do the action. And so in the core set, there's two of these cards in the lore sphere, and there's Radagast Cunning, and there's Secret Paths. And so you can play this here at this first action window if you wish, and there's other times throughout the phase that you can play it. But if you can't play it in the planning phase, you just can't. That's not a legit option.
Can't.
It's just against the rules. You can't play it in the combat phase. You must play it in the quest phase because it says quest action.
Yep. So you'll have a couple opportunities to do that. This is not the only action window in the game. There is one here. I don't know if it's particularly useful strategy-wise with the core set, but it does exist. So it might come up, but there is one.
This is the
so
one.
If you don't have any,
This is the time that you would normally play Sneak Attack Gandalf.
that's true. Yeah, right. I see. Okay.
That's the only time. Let me say this: you can play Sneak Attack and then bring Gandalf into play at any point. But Sneak Attack allows Gandalf to enter play and be in play for the entire phase, and then Gandalf would come in back into hand, or any ally that you have. And so Gandalf comes out, and then you can use him to commit characters. You can use him for the rest of the steps of the quest phase. If you bring him out after some of these steps, then he becomes useless for his stats. His when enter play effects will still trigger, but his stats will be useless.
Yeah. Thanks, David, for reminding me of that. I knew we pay you for some reason, and yeah. So there is a just to describe that card that David mentioned. There's a core set card called Sneak Attack. It's in leadership. It costs a resource. It's a regular action, but you can play it in the quest phase in this window. And the card says to put an ally from your hand into play without paying that ally's cost. And at the end of the phase, you get to return that ally back to your hand. So if there's an ally you couldn't afford to play, David used the example of Gandalf, who cost 5 resources because he's very expensive and has a enter play effect you could trigger. But it could be any ally that has some other ability or maybe has some willpower. 1, 2, 3 willpower. If you wanted to have that ally be a part of the quest phase, this is the opportune and really the only time, not the only time you can do it, but this is the actual time you would want to take advantage of that action.
So
for
the
that fight
rules,
to work.
by the rules, this is the time you want to do that.
Right, if you intend to quest with the character. So if you're doing that, now is the time. Otherwise, if you have no actions to take, we will move into the commit characters phase. And this is where you decide what heroes, what allies will be contributing their willpower stat, which is their top number that looks like I call it like a sunburst icon, like sun looking star thing. So anyone who you decide are going in the quest, now is the time to commit them. And usually you do that by exhausting the character and you turn them usually 90 degrees. And we'll be doing this in player order. So if Dave and I are playing a game and I'm first player, I will commit my characters first. And then once I've made my decision of my characters and allies going, David will look at his and decide who he wants to send. And this is a great opportunity to use teamwork when you're playing 2, 3, 4 players to collectively discuss as a team how much willpower you want to send. Because, if I only send one and David sends one, we have 2 collectively as a group, and that might not be enough for the turn. So depending on what threats are going to come out from the deck. And the reason this is so important is because during the encounter phase, this will be determining how you make progress towards the scenario. The excess willpower you have versus the threat that comes out of the encounter deck determines how much progress you make and actually advances the scenario. So you definitely want to commit as much as you can, keeping in mind the other challenges you have to face later in the turn, which may include mostly dealing with enemies and taking other actions.
Combat usually is. So you have to balance questing and combating.
Right.
And
so you
between you and all your friends that are playing the game.
Right. So if Dave and I on the other side, I commit 100% of my characters and David commits 100% of his characters, we have to get really, really lucky and hope that there's no enemies that we are forced to fight. Or we'll be suffering the consequences of dealing with enemies that we cannot defend, which we'll be discussing during the combat phase. So strategy tip, the game is about balance and decision making, which is why it's so intriguing to me. I
go back to the first thing, decision making, yes, but also incremental progress. Like sometimes it's good just to make, one or two extra. Like I would not expect every turn of the game that you're going to have, 10 extra progress or 20 extra progress to do stuff with. I just don't think that that's a reasonable expectation. This game is definitely, rewards you for making great decisions, but it rewards you in small incremental pieces. So, so if you can quest, 3 above the encounter deck, the first, I think that's probably pretty good. Like you're probably, and then you can make more progress as the game goes on.
Yeah. So, if I'm questing, one of my heroes is Eowyn. She's a real strong quester. She's got 4 willpower, which is one of the highest in the game, certainly in the core set. And David's got a strong quester, maybe like Lorfindel, who is a lore hero in the core set that's got 3 willpower. I commit my 4, he commits his 3. Well, now we have 7 collectively if we decide that's enough for the team to do. So we do that in player order. And again, you want to make discussion a part of it to do the actual planning and strategy.
If you're not talking, you're not doing it right?
Yeah. There's a challenge, a silent Lord of the Rings game. Man, that would be hard.
That would be crazy fun. I think I have a new variant for next year.
Oh man. Okay. We'll circle back on
silent,
that.
4 players silent.
No talking.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Anyways,
that'd be
so
hard.
after you commit, I think that there's one little thing that we should bring up here is that when you commit, you turn. Ted will turn his characters clockwise 90 degrees, and then I'll turn my characters clockwise 90 degrees, but they are all like, regardless of how you commit them, like whether you're choosing to commit now or choosing, like, or you wait 5 minutes and commit another person because you've talked about it, whatever, they still all commit to the quest at the same time. So when you have a trigger that happens after you commit to the quest, specifically on Aragorn and Theodred as two leadership heroes, the trigger line on them is after they commit to the quest. So technically, by the rules, no matter the time on the clock, if they are committing to the quest at the same time, you can trigger Theodred's after commit to the quest and give it to Aragorn, and then Aragorn can trigger his after he commits to the quest, and that allows you to ready Aragorn with the one resource. And so another timing issue is that if there's timing that happens at exactly the same time, the first player gets to choose which happens first. And so there's one case where the timing happens at exactly the same time, and that timing being right here where we're talking about after the players commit to the quest. Or after the character commits to the quest.
Right. So characters are committed simultaneously. Like me as first player, my characters are committed simultaneously, no matter which order I do them in. So whether if I have Eowyn, Theodred, and Aragorn, which are some other leadership heroes that David mentioned, no matter which one I physically turn sideways, like they're all committed at the same time. And then if you have some responses, like both Theodred and Aragorn have, where Theodred adds a resource to another questing hero, and Aragorn's ability is he can choose to spend a resource after he commits to ready himself. You can do those in either order. So the strategic order is use Theodred's ability to give resource to Aragorn, then trigger Aragorn's response to ready him, as David mentioned. And you could do that in the opposite order if you wanted to, if Aragorn already had a resource. But you trigger it all.
You can give Theodred's resource to Eowyn if she's committed, but you can't give, if you're first player, you can't give Theodred's resource to some other player that has yet to commit.
That's true, because as we mentioned, this is done in player order. So Theodred could give it to himself or any other hero. So in my example, Eowyn or Aragorn. But as Dave is saying, since he hasn't had his turn to commit characters yet, Theodred could not target them because they're not yet committed.
Right. So that's committing. That's committing characters to the quest, and this is going to take some practice, some getting used to and reading some of the cards and making sure you get this down. And so then there's staging after you commit.
Yep.
And staging is the most stressful part of the whole game. Oh, is there one more thing with committing?
I'll mention that technically, so after you commit and then you trigger any responses, if you have any, another action window actually pops up per the game's rules. There's a couple actions you could choose to take here. So Eowyn, for example, she has a quest action on her where each player may discard one card to boost her willpower. So you could choose to do that at this point in time, or as we've mentioned, there's going to be other action windows coming up to take quest actions, some of the cards. But there's another one just for reference.
Yep.
But then the staging.
Most stressful. And so, like, in the game, this is where, thematically, this is where the encounter deck gets a chance to kind of catch up. This is where, you've kind of done some things, and now Sauron is going to kind of position himself with his resources to kind of do his thing, And sometimes what comes off the encounter deck may be a location. And so now Sauron's giving you, another location that you have to tread through before you get to the final part of the game, or maybe an enemy comes off and you have to battle an orc or a spider or something, or a treachery, like Sauron is directly impacting you with his magic, and those or there's some other effects that are happening, scenario specific. And so thematically, this is Sauron catching up with you. So kind of the lower your threat, the less likely some of these things are to impact you. when it comes time there, but also some things are just automatically going to hit you like treacheries. So Ted, talk a little bit more about staging from a mechanical, like actual point of view here.
Yeah. So after each player's committed their characters, you're going to begin revealing one card per player from the encounter deck. So if Dave and I are playing a game, we're going to have to do 2 cards. You do them one at a time, and you have to fully resolve that card before you draw the next one. So if you draw a location like an enchanted stream out of the encounter deck that comes into play, it enters the staging area. If it has that location has no enter play, has no when revealed the text, that location just comes into play, goes to staging area, it's resolved. It's there to now deal with per the rules of the location. Then we reveal another card. If that card is a treachery card, we have to do its when revealed effects and fully resolve it and make decisions depending on what that says. So just read each card line by line. Just read the card, the whole thing in its entirety. That's the best advice I can give because even veteran players, myself included, I'm not exempt from this. I will like, oh, I've played this card, I've done this quest 10 times, so I know what this card does. Well, maybe I've played it wrong 10 times because I just didn't read the second sentence of it, or I did the second sentence first. So read it sentence by sentence and resolve it as best you can as you go and read the card.
It says bold. It'll say bold on treacheries. There's treacheries like Necromancer's Reach, Caught in the Web, which you resolve immediately, and it'll say when revealed. There are also enemies like Dol Guldur Orcs, which have when revealed effects as well, that say the first player chooses one character currently committed to the quest, deal 2 damage to that character. And so there's all sorts of when revealed effects that allow the encounter deck to kind of catch up on the players after they've had their planning phase and all these things. So that's kind of the thing. But staging is probably the most stressful thing. Common cards to play here during this particular step, actually, as far as I know, there's really just one, which is a test of will. So during the staging step, you can cancel the when revealed on an encounter card as a response, but there is no action window in between each card that is revealed. And so if you have 2 players and you get the Dol Guldur Orcs first, and I have to deal 2 damage to a character, and now I have a character that has 2 damage on it, there's no action window in there to heal that character. So then if the next card is now a Necromancer's Reach, which does 1 damage to all my characters committed to the quest, and that particular character has 3 damage on it and it dies, it's dead. I can't go back in time to heal it. There's no interrupts in this game that interrupts staging. Staging happens all in a row. 1 card, next card, next card. The only thing that you can do is responses like Eleanor and responses like Test of Will.
Yeah, that's a very important note. There are no actions during staging. There's no actions in between cards, but you can trigger responses. And that's a key strategy to the game. It's a key part of deck building, is to incorporate responses to be able to combat the encounter deck. Test of Will being the chiefly probably most important in the core set, and also for the rest of the game as the card pool expands. Check out our episode on that particular card for some more details. But yeah, because some players wonder, can I heal characters? Can I draw player cards? No, you can't play cards. You can't take actions. Only responses.
You're kind of at the whim of the encounter deck at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But probably the most important part of questing is the next part of questing. Wouldn't you agree, Ted? This is like
well, so we'll sort of assume you're talking about resolution, which is very important. But we will make this point here that after staging has completely occurred, there is an action window.
Oh, there's an action window. You and your action windows.
Right?
And now this is
Me and my
probably the
action
most
windows.
important action window in all of this, right? Because this is where you can do your quest modifications and stuff.
Exactly. So if we are playing Eleanor, or excuse me, Eowyn, they're both spirit heroes that start with E. For playing Eowyn, Eowyn's ability is to discard cards to boost her willpower. And even though we haven't resolved the quest yet, which is the next step, we can take actions to manipulate willpower, to reduce willpower, or excuse me, reduce threat of cards, like we talked about. Radagast Cunning, you pick an enemy in the staging area and you don't count its threat. So
This
you
is the
take that
most
Google the
logical
orcs.
point to play Radagast Cunning and Secret Paths, probably.
Yep. Same thing with Eowyn too. It's usually, that's why those abilities are powerful, because they let you can play them at this particular junction in the game, which is after you reveal cards, after staging, but before you resolve the quest and you start counting some of the numbers on the table.
Right. Faramir is also a really popular card to play here. A lot of people will wait to not quest with ally Faramir, and then Faramir has an action that says every questing character gets +1 willpower, and so you can exhaust Faramir to add that willpower at this stage in the game after you've seen whether or not you need that boost, and you can kind of react a little bit to what the encounter deck threw at you there.
Right. So if you're behind, like, oh, we didn't send enough willpower, this is where you can try to make up by adding willpower to your own numbers or subtracting threat via events and other actions.
And so this is why you cannot play, or well, you can sneak attack Gandalf into play, but it doesn't.
You can sneak attack any ally into play.
Right. You can sneak attack an ally into play, but you've already missed the commit him to the quest, and so you can't. So you won't be able to use that character's stats, and so that's why the sneak attack usually has to happen at the beginning of the phase.
Yep. And the reason modifying these numbers is so important, and why this quest resolution is so critical, is because the quest resolution phase now begins, which, as David suggested, is very, very important. And what essentially happens is all the players will collectively count their willpower after any modifications in that action window. So if I committed my 4 and David committed his 3, we will count now all of the threat in the staging area. We haven't actually gotten to, so the next series of this video will be we'll be covering the travel phase and active locations, but we'll make a note here in case you're watching these not in that order. If you have an active location, that does not count its threat. If you have enemies engaged with you that you're actively fighting, those enemies do not count their threat. You are only looking at cards that are in the staging area and sort of not in other places outside of that.
Right. The active location is removed from the staging area and put into the active location slot. Engaged enemies are removed from the staging area and put in your play area in front of you. So you're only counting those things that are in the staging area as threat. And so, keep in mind, there are encounter cards that also modify threat on encounter cards. +1 threat for encounter cards, locations in the staging area and things like that. So
yeah, there are treacheries that modify those.
So keep those in mind too. So
yep.
So you add up all the threat on the locations and the enemies, including any modifiers. And then you add up all the willpower that you've committed to the quest using Ted's example. That's 7. And then you compare.
Yeah. So let's say in this example that we've kind of been throwing out some card names. So we'll just stick with those. If we flipped over an Enchanted Stream as our first card, and we flipped over a Dol Guldur Orcs, and let's just say those are the only 2 cards in the staging area. Those each have 2 threat. And Dave and I committed 7 versus 4. We would now count and those numbers, and the difference would be our progress for the turn, which would be 3.
Right. So if we beat the encounter deck, we do something called quest successfully. And there are some triggers in the game that happen upon questing successfully. And there are also some times where you quest unsuccessfully, where the threat in the staging area is greater than the amount of willpower you've committed to the quest with all the modifiers. And now you have quested unsuccessfully. If the amount of willpower equals the amount of threat, I call it quest neutral, but the game says you've neither quested successfully nor unsuccessfully. So that's neither. I just call it quest neutral, and nothing happens. But Ted, what happens when we quest unsuccessfully?
So if you quest unsuccessfully, which is defined, as you mentioned, the threat being greater than your willpower, each player will raise your personal threat dial by the difference of the loss. So let's say we committed our 7, David, but because of cards that came out or cards that were already in play, we had 10 threat in the staging area. And we had no cards we could play or tricks up our sleeves. So it would be 7 willpower versus the 10 threat. And there'd be a difference of 3 not in our favor. So my threat goes up by 3 and David's threat goes up by 3 in that particular example.
Right.
Which is bad.
Which is bad.
Because that puts you towards losing.
Right. And so you want to try to make progress. And again, I would expect incremental progress at the beginning of the game. Like that's what you're looking for. You're not looking to put 20 progress down to clear out a location and get through the first quest card. You're really looking to, kind of beat the quests just enough just to get 1 or 2 progress on maybe an active location. Once you get your wheels underneath you, you may develop a strategy where you want to get at least enough to clear the active location and put progress on the active location every round, but you'll feel that out as you're playing your first few games.
Yeah, it's a very, very important part of the game, is balancing the step and making that incremental progress. And we'll talk a little bit about the quest neutral term, or not questing successfully. It's I call it a break even. All players have their own little term for it, it seems. Right. And that's okay too. Sometimes the math just works out that way, and that's okay too. I consider that if you're a blackjack player, it's push, right? I mean, it's you match the dealer, it's a tie, right, and that's okay. I still count that as sort of a win, because if your threat didn't, you didn't threat up, you didn't make as much progress as you wanted to, but it could be worse.
Right. So Ted, you know what I'm going to do? I am not going to have to worry about raising my threat at all. So what I'm going to do is I'm just not going to commit any characters to the quest. And because I'm not committing any characters to the quest, I don't have to do any of this, right?
Unfortunately, David, that's not correct.
Oh man, I've been playing this game wrong for so long.
Yep. There's no way to skip this phase. There's no way to skip staging. You can't skip revealing cards. You can't skip the quest phase. You could, by a strategy point, not commit characters to the quest and commit 0 willpower. However, you'll be subject to the same exact rules. So if you flip over 7 threat worth of cards, your threat will go up by 7 because you have 0 willpower and 7 threat. So
that's a mistake that people make all the time in this game. Is they go through, especially beginners. Once you realize that you have to quest every turn, you have to go through each part of each phase every round, so if you decide not to quest and send characters to the quest, you're sending 0 to the quest, and that's going to be compared. That changes the game. So as Ted said, you don't have to commit characters to the quest, and you can quest for 0, but that's not going to be a long-term strategy to get you to win. You can't ignore any phase of the game or any step within each phase of the game. Like, I'm not going to commit to the quest, so that way the quest doesn't happen. Sauron is always going to make progress against you. Sauron always is going to try to beat you down.
Yep. There are certain parts of the game which are optional that we'll be covering in some future or other phases
Sure.
coming up to the game, but there are no optional parts in this quest phase.
Yeah. Yep. So, are there any last gasps? There's an action
That pretty
window
much
there at
covers
the
it.
end.
After you completely resolve, there is an action window to play anything that might be relevant or that you want to do before you move into the next phase of the game, which is going to be the travel phase that we'll discuss in another episode. But if you have no actions otherwise, the quest phase ends, and that's it. You're ready to go into the travel phase, which we'll be talking about.
And so at this point, when it ends, this is if you had sneak attacked a character, an ally into play, when the quest phase ends is when you would pick that character up and put it back into your hand. And
right.
And then and anything else. Any treacheries and
modification. A lot of things end at this phase. If there's a treachery that increased a location's threat, if you boosted your character's willpower, a lot of those effects will say till the end of the phase. So once questing's over and you move into the travel phase officially, those bonuses are going to go away, and it's going to go back to its printed value.
Even Eowyn's bonus at this point is over with, because that's until the end of the phase. So you don't get your extra willpower for the remainder of the round. You get it for the phase. And all of it's on the cards, but even the best players like Ted in the game forget, what the cards say sometimes. And, so just make sure you read the cards. It's going to take you a little bit longer to go through as a new player, just reading cards and remembering what those cards say and making sure that you're doing it correctly, I guess.
Yeah. That's it.
Okay,
but,
so
that's it. You've quested hopefully successfully, and your journey will continue.
Okie doke. Well, there you have it. That's the quest phase. So join us again in another couple of days, and we will talk about the travel phase and engagement phase all together at once, if you want a little look ahead. So join us as we talk about more new player stuff in the game. Have a great day, everybody.
Do you love the content? Here's what you can do to stay connected. Become a patron. The money collected through Patreon goes into keeping the lights on here at the podcast. We love our patrons, and you can join at many different levels. Visit patreon.com/cardtalk2018. You can subscribe to us, whether you're watching our YouTube channel or you're listening to us in your favorite podcatcher. Hit the subscribe button to get notifications of all our new episodes. Didn't know we were an audio podcast? Find us by searching Card Talk to get access to our 120 plus regular episodes. Didn't know we were a video channel? Find us by searching Card Talk LOTR LCG on YouTube, and there you can find not only our regular episodes, but you can find our bonus playthroughs and other content related to the game. Want to get a hold of Ted, Grant, or myself? Feel free to email the podcast at cardtalk2018@gmail.com.